Q put it to Picard that the exploration of different dimensions, parallel realities and the universe was the next large goal of humanity. Looking into certain realities and realms of Star Trek lore often provides proof that we're not ready for that yet, as some realms are shaped by thought alone while others are as alien as their inhabitants. Hello, Rick here, and today we're looking into the nature of Fluidic Space, the home of species 8472, what it is, how to get there, and what we can infer from its inhabitants. Be forewarned though, this has no definite answers, as Star Trek hasn't provided any, and I think that's brilliant. Briefly, let's look at some properties of this place so we know what we're dealing with. First up, it is referred to as another dimension or an extra-dimensional realm. This is a fairly broad term that in Star Trek has been used to cover sections of our universe yet unseen, like higher planes of existence, as well as alternate realities. Okay, so right into the deep end already then. This realm's chief characteristic, however, is that it is filled with an organic fluid that permeates every corner of its observable dimension. The seeming sole species that lives here is called Species 8472 by the Borg and the Undine by later era Starfleet. This species is biologically very different from anything in our standard universe and is even considered by the Borg to be close to organic perfection. So what is Fluidic Space? Despite being a dimension outside of our main one, it seems that certain laws of physics still apply, which tells us that we're not dealing with an added axis like a cube getting a fourth dimension and becoming a hypercube. Objects can exist both here and in normal space, without noticeable adverse effects, like having physics.exe just crash on you. So, at the very least, this isn't a higher dimension on the same level as the Q continuum, which has to be viewed as a metaphor by us poor mortals. But what about the fact that it is filled with this fluid? Well, first off, a fluid doesn't necessarily mean a liquid. Scientifically, a liquid is a fluid, but a gas is also a fluid. In fact, anything that yields to pressure and flows could be considered a fluid. So for starters, this cosmic makeup could be anything from a fine mist to treacle. We see the USS Voyager move through it easily enough, and the bioships of species 8472 can traverse space as easily as their home turf, so it can't be too thick. It is, as stated in its first introduction, organic in nature, so it is either alive or the byproduct of something alive. And now we have our first thing that doesn't make sense. If this stuff fills the entirety of creation, then shouldn't it collapse? There's no depth pressure here, but as physics seems to operate the same, then gravitational force is still a thing. One particle of this matter is pulled to another, then a third, then more, and eventually enough of the mass has formed to exert a stronger gravitational pull, and soon you're looking at a giant sphere of everything that gets denser the closer to the centre you get. And if fluidic space is infinite, then we get an infinitely dense core or something? I'm going to take a step back from this eldritch trail of thought before I go mad. The point is that there has to be something keeping fluidic space from collapsing in on itself, and as a physical presence it couldn't exist in our reality. So I can see a couple of options here. Either 1. The laws of physics in the fluidic realm are more different than they first appear, and something fundamental is changed. Like perhaps space-time is more rigid and cannot bend to the whim of gravity, or some other sci-fi explanation. This could be the case, but then the laws have to be similar enough to allow for creatures from both dimensions to exist in each other's. So, option 2. The laws of physics are the same, and what we see is only a snapshot of this dimension's life cycle. It could be that fluidic space is indeed a spherical universe, gradually compressing together in its own weird entropy, and the Borg happened to visit it before its big crunch. Or sploosh, in this case. It could be that species 8472 only exists in a Goldilocks zone, where the density is just right for their existence, and the closer to the centre you go, the denser it is. Or maybe it's at the other end, and we are seeing a universe in its earliest stages of development, where all the matter is relatively close together. Though if this were the case, my very limited understanding of physics says that the start of the universe was a little toasty, and also widely considered a bad idea that made a lot of people very angry. Then there's option 3 as to how it seems to be stable. The fluid itself has some property that counteracts any gravitational attraction. Maybe whatever matter it's made from repels other molecules, so there's always this equal force pushing outwards as inwards. Heck, it's organic. It could even be alive, and a sea of amoeba that are always trying to swim away from each other. How to get there? A quantum singularity. In universe, creating a stream of gravitons with a specialised deflector modification creates a quantum singularity that forms a breach in our universe. Passing through it brings a ship into fluidic space. In real life, a singularity is a term used to measure a point and often used to describe a black hole. Flying a ship into a black hole is also generally regarded as a bad idea, and very unlikely to take you anywhere unless you believe in an afterlife. But Star Trek has had a strange relationship with singularities and playing with gravity to produce all sorts of effects. Sure, Star Trek 2009 used a black hole to drop Ambassador Spock into an alternate reality, but Voyager did it first. As for the term quantum, this probably originates from the use of gravitons, a theoretical quantum particle that something gravity. From everything we saw in Star Trek, we're going to have to assume that this is a very different type of singularity from your standard black hole. In fact, we've heard the term quantum singularity used before in reference to the artificial core of Romulan starships. They use these in place of a warp core to bend space-time and achieve warp speeds. Fluidic Space's inhabitants. Species 8472. Not too much is known about them. These aliens are adapted to life within their realm and seem to operate on differing biology, just as their home dimension seems to defy physics. They have a triple helix DNA, and we see this dividing into thirds repeated in their bodies. They have 3 legs, 3 necks, and their ship design seems based on mirrored thirds. They also have 3 fingers and a thumb, and those nubs. So, just as their fundamental realm may be similar but different, their biology too seems to have a basis in the recognisable, but plays by a different rulebook. The species is telepathic, and contamination from their cells can lead to you being digested by them as that contamination spreads. Perhaps they then come back and hoover up the soup, meaning that's how they eat? If they eat? They are very territorial and about as aggressive in their defence as their immune system, which destroys any foreign material, hence the Borg being unable to assimilate them. They also produce an energy field that scrambles sensors, and they can survive in a complete vacuum, which is also odd for a species that evolved in a realm without much of a vacuum. The pressure waves of objects moving through fluidic space are detectable by the species, and they can use this to hone in on an invader's location. They possess the ability to modify their genetic makeup to morph into replicas of other species for infiltration and disguise through technology. They are also immensely strong and agile. One thing that is very interesting, however, is their technology. They operate bioships, spacecraft that are organic in nature and seem to have a single pilot. The inside of these vessels looks to be much softer than the outer hull, which I'd speculate was some form of carapace, but does possess user interfaces. The bioships could amass a large amount of power, allowing for warp travel, and it can fire off anti-polaron beams that can annihilate the target, including planets. They also use antimatter as propulsion for warp speeds. So they have antimatter, which means that their matter at least acts like our universe's matter. The fact that they have operational warp drive also shows that minimal or no adaptation is required in order to bring their bioships into our realm and still utilise warp mechanics. Star Trek Online also points out large formations and growths that appear to be coral-like structures the size of planetoids that drift in the currents of fluidic space. So, where did fluidic space come from? Well, we don't know. It could be a whole universe unto itself that exists alongside the standard Trek realities, or it could be an area of the universe that is yet to be explored. It might even be a universe in the process of forming, or at the end of its existence, perhaps even the end of our universe. Species 8472 might be the sole survivors of their realm out of a myriad of life forms. Perhaps the organic compound that permeates everything is the remains of all other life, digested by the Undine. I literally scrawled 8472 poop ? In my notes here. Species 8472 are rather xenophobic by nature, so perhaps, long ago, they wiped out all other life that existed in their realm. After all, the weak shall perish. Fluidic space could be any size, infinite or finite. We just don't see enough of it to explore, and species 8472 aren't into sharing. So it could be a single globe of fluid jostling among other globes like cells. The entirety of fluidic space is organic after all, from the Undine to the ships to the fluid medium itself, so maybe it's a single conscious universe. Are the Undine a part of a telepathic whole? Driven by some unseen, unknowable singular will bent on purifying all other realms like some old god horror from the darkest depths of a nightmare? Probably not. But what if fluidic space was artificially created? Species 8472 is strangely well adapted to life in our universe, and their ships handle the change in environment just fine, as do Starfleet's. So perhaps they evolved in our reality, but proved too hostile for an ancient race to manage, and they successfully exiled them to a pocket dimension, a strange prison realm to trap them forever. Perhaps filling it with this liquid was a way to prevent this pocket dimension from collapsing? Although disputing this idea is the fact that 8472 seem quite capable of leaving whenever they desire. But they didn't know of our reality until the Borg invaded, so perhaps their history was lost. The idea of fluidic space, to me, is far cooler than it first seemed, watching Voyager all those years ago. It suggests that there are concepts that lie beyond our and Starfleet's understanding, and that is what the Federation needs to expand and grow. I mean, beyond Trek, science in real life thrives off challenging what we know and what we think we know. Struggling to understand concepts that are alien to us is what drives our curiosity. And fluidic space, through Starfleet, shows us that the Federation has barely touched the surface of what's possible. Perhaps we're just not supposed to understand how fluidic space works. Perhaps Q did it. Perhaps I better go to bed and stop trying to figure out made-up technobabble. Stop trying to figure out made-up stuff. Now I really am talking nonsense. Thanks for listening. And if you made it to the end of the video, you're a hero. But honestly, what do you think fluidic space is? I'll be taking a break from the Undine and Borg stuff after this, I think, and next week's video will be a cultural index, so I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again for watching, and until then, goodbye.